Okay, I'm going to show a few more advanced techniques. If you've been using the bandsaw for a while, these will come in handy. The first thing is exactly how tight can we turn. The cool thing about bandsaws, it's not a good common habit to do this, but it does actually tell you how sharp of a corner it can cut. And what's going to happen is I'm going to start to cut, and then I'm going to turn my wood, and what's going to happen is I'm going to actually turn that band, and as it turns it will run into the bearings on either side, or it will run into the guide blocks if you have a smaller bandsaw. And as it turns and touches those, it will start to squeal. And the cool thing is, the more it squeals, the more it tells you it's in pain, until suddenly it goes boom, and then you're left having to change your pants. So the best thing is, as soon as it starts telling you it's in pain, is to stop. And I'll let you hear what that sounds like.
At this point you can hear, and I don't want to touch it too much anymore, so I'll back it off just a little bit.
And as you can see here, with a 3/8 bandsaw blade, I can cut approximately 3 inches. And I'm sure there's some ratio, but what's more important is that you cut safely and don't cut more than that. If you need to cut a sharper angle than that, you either need a smaller blade, or a typical machine is a scroll saw that will do that type of cut specifically for that work, like in a bandsaw box application. The next thing I want to talk about is taking a light cut. Let's say that I cut this shape out right here, but I want to come in and cut just a very small amount off. If I was to do that with just cutting straight into it, the tendency is to cut more than I want to, because you're pushing into the blade. Well, the nice thing about a bandsaw blade is that its blade is not exactly straight. The bandsaw blade, if I was to look at a sideways view of the bandsaw blade, it has its hooks coming out. However, these hooks are not directly in line with the band. The band comes straight, and then one hook will turn one way and the other hook will turn the other way, which means my kerf, the whole cutaway, is actually larger than my actual band, which is what allows me to turn, is because I'm cutting more at the front than the back, and so the back of my band can actually fit more in this groove and turn. Well, the nice thing about that is I am actually cutting farther in than the width of my blade by a very small amount, probably a 1/64 of an inch that it's bent out. So I can use that to my advantage when I want to cut something off more. So I'm going to put a small line on here and show you. Now I have you can probably barely see it, but I very gently put a small line, and I just want to take the smallest amount off. Let's say a 1/64 off the side of this. I'm working with really tight tolerances. I need another object to fit inside this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it up to the bandsaw, and very gently I'm going to push this sideways. I'll move the blade guard up for clarity at this point. I'm going to push sideways into the piece of wood, and then very gently I'm going to pull it backwards, rubbing it against the blade. And that small kerf, that blade, every other blade that sticks out, will take off a very fine amount. If I turn it this way when I pull it out, I'll actually be pushing from the back of the blade, and it'll be dragging it forward, which is not what I want. I want to keep in a straight line and just let the front of that tooth take off a very small amount. This is only on very tight tolerances. You're not going to want to do this as a general practice, but for fitting another object in, this is a good useful tool. And just that fast, you can see I've able to take off. Of course, this is really soft wood, but I was able to take off probably a 64th off of that edge without damaging the rest of my product. The other thing that I can do if I have some bumps along the bottom here, or if I'm trying to clean out a very small pocket, is I can actually, once I've cut into it a few times, I can actually very slowly drag the front end of that bandsaw sideways to clean up a very small cut. It's not very accurate, but it does clean it up, doing like what a chisel would, going back and forth. If you were to put pressure forward and then push it sideways, you'll cut into your project, obviously, or you'll torque your bandsaw blade if you're just pushing straight sideways. So that's not a good application for this, but for taking off small amounts, because the bandsaw is so versatile, it is an advanced technique that you can become proficient with. A couple last things that I'd like to cover. When you are cutting a small piece, generally on a principle, I would never advise cutting something round. If you were to cut something round, there is no support under the back of this, and if I was to cut into this, it would grab and torque it down, potentially throw my finger into it. So never cut round objects on it. If you are cutting round this way, my finger is going to get really close to that. Some teachers have the 4-inch rule as a rule in their using their shop tools. However, the bandsaw, a lot of times for tolerances and to get specific, you need to be very close. So in this application, what I would do is I'm going to find another stick to be my sacrificial piece. And so if I want to cut off a small edge on this piece, if I come in here with my thumb, I'm going to be pretty close to that, and I'm pushing almost into that blade. So what I can do is I can have a sacrificial piece and come in here and put this against it and use that as my guide to push it. And this will get cut as well, but it's a scrap piece, so I don't care. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is cutting a wide piece. I've seen this happen a few times, so just as a principle to think about. When you're cutting a wide piece, a lot of students will want to put their arms on the very outside so that they're farthest away from the bandsaw. However, all the way away, what happens when your hands are all the way away, as you cut through that board, as soon as you get to this close side of the board, your hands will automatically push into the blade and you'll create a pinch point on the back side of that blade. So what's best to do is actually to create your get your hands closer so that when you cut through, you can move your hands away as you pass through. Here we'll create a pinch point, and it will also put pressure on the front of your block, causing you potentially to cut where you don't want to. The last thing, and one of the things that I should have covered at the beginning, is this direct travel in front of the blade. This blade is in a fixed position. It will only cut at this point. It will not move towards you. The only way you can cut your finger or cut anything is to move it into that blade. What a tendency is with a new student when they're cutting into their block is to put their thumb or their fingers directly in line with the blade as they push through for the best pressure. Unfortunately, if the wood were to give way, you have immediate direct line of sight for your finger getting cut off. So make sure whenever you are cutting that your hands and appendages are not in direct line. Never push direct pressure in line with the blade. Always have your hands to the side.